Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So we'll give you a few minutes to come into the program. This is part of a series of conversations that started back in May, actually in March, when COVID-19 became a reality. We tried to get a way for us to continue to communicate, to engage, to provide a context to the world that we are both experiencing and living. I'm Dr. Hatem Bazian, the director of the Islamophobia Studies Center. And it's really a pleasure, and I'm really delighted to have with me Dr. Mitri Raheb. Last time we visited each other, or you visited us, was here right in Berkeley at the Pacific School of Religion when we had the 10th anniversary of the Kairos Document, and we had a conversation to really discuss the ins and outs of what is taking place in Palestine. Dr. Mitri is the founder and president of al-Kalima University College of Arts and Culture in Bethlehem in Palestine. And to his credit, is the most widely published Palestinian theologian to date, with 16 books to his credit. And I did put on the chat the bio as well as the link to his webpage. It's very important for me as an academic, as a person that works and deals with Palestine, that the voices of Palestinians are centered. We are often spoken about, but not spoken to, one, and not allowed actually to speak in our own voice. My often description is that we are in a theater piece about our own lives, and we're supporting actors in our own lives, that our role is to come in, bring the tea, and exit, and then everybody continues the conversation about us in general. So this is part of the conversation that's really to center Palestinian voices in the really the breadth of contributions. I know in the West, we know the works of Edward Said, Abu Lughod, Lisa Hajjar, and others. And this is really a pleasure for me to have Mitri with me. So welcome, Mitri, and marhaba, kayf al-hal, and welcome to our conversation.
Thank you, Hatem. It's really a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Maybe just give us a short biography of who you are, how you grew up, both in terms of your family background, but also academically and in terms of your training.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in Bethlehem and grew up here. I did my studies, all my studies actually in Germany. And I finished there my doctorate in 1987. Came back to Palestine 6 months before the first Intifada started. I came back thinking that I'm coming back with all the answers to the questions of my people. And the first Intifada just taught me that, I mean, these Western answers don't fit the questions people in Palestine have. So I really had to learn to listen to our people during the first Intifada, because all the clashes at that time, demonstrations were happening around our church and parsonage. So we were in the middle, downtown Bethlehem, where everything was happening. And actually this helped me to start doing contextual theology. Mm-hmm. So what does really Christian theology mean in the Palestinian context? I mean, when you have every Sunday to climb up the pulpit, I became senior pastor of Christmas Lutheran Church. When you have to climb up the pulpit every Sunday to preach, and your people are under siege, under oppression, you cannot do it the way this ivory tower theology does. And so that was really the beginning of this journey towards contextual theology, post-colonial theology, decolonial theology. From theology, I moved also to action. Action meaning I felt we had to create institutions that empower our people But I didn't choose their theology as the tools for social transformation, but arts and culture. Because I think arts and culture provide a very important platform for the whole Palestinian people to come together. When I studied in Germany, every time we were talking about with other Palestinian students about politics, often we were, clashing. About religion, people were a bit, shy to talk about religion. But when we started, singing Fairuz, everyone was on board. And this showed me actually how important actually also culture to bring people together, especially as Palestinians, we are so fragmented by Israel. And we need to fight this fragmentation through many means: political, social, cultural, economic. And for me, the cultural aspect is important.
Well, picking up on your first point about contextual theology, and I think your work, if I may say, in terms of contextual theology as well, liberation theology in general, how does that look in maybe the specifics of it relative to the Palestinians, and to distinguish it possibly from the discussions about theological discourses that we see in here? And we'll pick up on some of the issues relative to Christian Zionism and the particular theology that we see.
Right. For me, contextual theology has been a journey, really, along the way. And I guess the problem in Palestine often was that lots of the Christian theology was imported. Because, our best theologians were maybe educated abroad. And often they wanted to bring those ideas back to Palestine without contextualizing them. Now that does not work. And so how can we develop a theology from the heart of the Palestinian struggle? This was the question really that I was interested in. And so listening to the people and to their questions is really important and crucial in this process. So this is one. Secondly, how can we connect, while doing theology, with many streams of theology abroad that are struggling in a similar way like us? This is why, for example, with Kairos Palestine, when we wrote the document, and we decided to call it Kairos, because we wanted to connect to the struggle in South Africa against apartheid, because people in South Africa wrote the Kairos South Africa document back in 1985. And so we wanted to connect with that. When I look today at what's happening in the United States on the streets, George Floyd,
Jacob Black,
etc. Exactly. I mean, you can see many similarities. And so connecting with the struggle of the African Americans is really important. Connecting to the struggle with Native Americans in the States, in Australia, in many other countries that experience settler colonialism is important. So that's really, I think, what is exciting with contextual theology is how to develop a theology from the heart of Palestinian context. So we have to be rooted, like I always say, like an olive tree. Our roots deeply rooted in the Palestinian soil, but our branches connect with the whole world, especially those who are struggling like us. So that's really how I do contextual theology.
And maybe I would add to the following, that both of us work on colonialism, settler colonialism. And you mentioned earlier that some part of our theology has been imported to us. So we actually often don't pay attention to the educational infrastructure that we all came out of, which basically have oriented us to see the world in a particular way, even our own theology. And this is not exclusive to the Christian Palestinian community, but similarly, Muslim communities likewise, in terms of their educational infrastructure, emerges of that colonial experience.
Exactly, and I think this is a really a very important point. Now, what I discovered on this journey was that it's good for us to reread the Bible, because the Bible actually is a product that came out of Palestine,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the text of the Bible, actually, if not all of them, were written in context of oppression. Because Palestine historically was facing all of these empires.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from the first Assyrian Empire, all the way to the Israeli American Empire today. That's our story. And so actually the Bible, if we read it from our own perspective, this is really what the original context was. But then this book, after the 4th century with the Constantinian conversion, it became the book of the empire, rather than the book of those oppressed fighting the empire. So how can we reclaim that original story and history, which is, again, the Bible really was written in the context of Palestine, not in the context of, Jesus always, I say, was born in Bethlehem, Palestine, not Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And so we have to read it in that context.
I do always often mention that we have what you call imperial religion, where the text is taking place and is adopted by empire, versus the religion and the text of the people, where Jesus, Moses, Muhammad were walking with the people, rather than being in the court of empire as public relations, religious officers of empire.
Exactly. These are يعني أنبياء البلاط بنسميهم بالعربي, the prophets of the not sure what's in English. In German, it's Hofpropheten. So
the prophets of the court.
Exactly. Yeah. So
maybe we could right now shift a little bit in relations to what is taking place on Palestine on the ground today. I know that the Christian community in the West Bank is really unable to visit its religious sites in Jerusalem on any regular basis, but the restrictions in general that is there. So how living under occupation and under structures that really cuts out the Palestinians from one another, from different towns. I know for a fact that people maybe in Nablus have not been able to visit Bethlehem just because of the difficulty, or somebody actually born in the West Bank not actually visiting any of the important sites, without even speaking about the 1948 area.
Right. I mean, this is actually part of a settler colonial project, which takes more and more land and confine the indigenous people in something like reservations. So if you look today actually at the map of the West Bank and Gaza, it looks very much like a piece of a Swiss cheese, where basically Israel gets the cheese and the Palestinians are pushed in the holes. And so leaving the hole become a struggle in itself. So Bethlehem in itself is this kind of a hole within the cheese. So if we want to go to Jerusalem, we need a permit. Mm-hmm. If we want to go to Hebron in the south, we have to go through Israeli settlements, Israeli checkpoints. If we want to go to Jericho, we have to go through Israeli checkpoints. If we want to go to Ramallah, we have to go through checkpoints. So this is the shrinking space that we are experiencing. And the idea behind it is to take as much land as possible, either de facto, which is happening all the time, or de jure, which is the idea behind the annexation. And so we feel squeezed more and more and more and more. And the aim of this actually is to push Palestinians out, for them to say life is unbearable let's look for other opportunities to reach and to unleash our full potential. I mean, if you look at Gaza, and we have started a training center in Gaza a year ago. I mean, Gaza is the largest open air prison in the world. Everything is polluted, you know, the sea, the air, the underground water aquifer. And according to international experts, life already in 2020 in Gaza is unlivable. And so you make life so easy so that everyone in Gaza think, you know, how can I get out and never come back? And this is part of settler colonialism, because the difference between settler colonialism and colonialism as such is that settler colonialism wants to replace the indigenous people and kick them out. So because in the settler colonial mentality, the settlers are there to stay, but the indigenous people are there to go. And so, you know, our people, Christian, Muslims, feel all of these restrictions. Even if we want to go, you know, on Holy Week to Jerusalem to pray, it is a struggle. And often, you know, maybe one person is getting a permit from the family, his brother or sister are not getting. And so you create, you know, all of these, you know, all of these measures just to make the life of people miserable. And this is really the whole idea behind it.
And maybe that touches on some of the issues we confront here in the United States in our work and advocacy for Palestine. As you know, the narrative that is put out, sometimes even the Israeli ambassador will put an editorial in the Chicago Tribune or Washington Post saying that we're trying to protect the Palestinian Christian community from their Muslim counterparts. And the reason that the Christian community's numbers in Palestine is declining is because of this tension. Now, I know there is historical tensions and a relationship between Muslim and Christians. We have a long history in relations, but how that narrative gets constructed in essence to really rally support for Israel. So how do you navigate that particular narrative? And I know you recently participated in a conference in Qatar that focused, or not recently, maybe just a while back, that looked at the Christians of the East and the forced migration that has been underway.
Yeah, actually, this is an interesting question, Hatem, because my upcoming book, which I just finished this week, and we just are signing the contract with the publisher. It's called The Politics of Persecution.
Oh, nice.
And I look at this narrative about Christian persecution. And it's really very interesting because this narrative is not about the reality, it's about the perception, and it's about a Western perception. I looked at the history of the Middle East in the last 150 years. And actually, if you look at the Middle East 150 years ago, it was the most pluralistic society. I mean, in the Ottoman Empire, over 25% of the population were Christians, ethnically diverse. But the Muslim community itself is also very diverse.
Sure.
And this idea of Christian persecution actually started as a narrative in the middle of 19th century as a way for Western empires to interfere in what is happening in the Middle East. And so this became the narrative. And then later, after First World War, the narrative became majorities versus minority. So because suddenly the empires, British and French, were controlling the Middle East, so they couldn't speak about persecution of Christians. So they started talking about majority, minority. We are there to protect the minorities, not only the Christian minorities, Alawites and others, you know, Shiite and so on. And now actually with President Trump and Vice President Pence, we saw that this narrative is coming back vehemently. You hear conferences, large conferences about protecting the persecuted Christians, defending the persecuted Christians. And this is part of actually a Western, very conservative, populist agenda that utilizes and instrumentalizes the Christians of the Middle East for their own, not for our own sake, but for the sake of the Christian right, basically, and the Christian politicians. And actually, Mahmoud Darwish wrote a poem. The title was They Love Me Dead. And he was talking actually about some of the Arab countries who always like to see the Palestinians as martyrs. And he's saying they like me dead so that they can evangelize me. And what I'm saying is that this Western Christian Zionist movement, they like to have the Christians of the Middle East persecuted so that they can evangelize us. And we, I think when you started this evening, you said something very important. We cannot tolerate anymore anybody to speak on our behalf. We have to speak on our own behalf, and we have to develop our own narrative. And we have to tell our own story as we see it. And the time for Britain or France or the US to have mandate over us because we are not ready to be in control is over. And this is, I think, part of what we are trying to do, is really to resist this attempt to victimize us, to minoritize us, and to utilize us for their own political ends.
Well, the notion that the indigenous, the colonized subject is unable to practice and enter into self-governance, into democracy, into participatory, and therefore they still have to be trained on how to do it. And often, again, the trainer that comes is not interested in your liberation, your taking control of your life, your society, your resources in particular. And maybe that gets us into the whole process of the annexation. And if you comment about the recent United Arab Emirates-Israel deal, because it's been posited that this stopped Israel annexation. So what's your view of this current annexation and then the United Arab Emirates-Israel deal, and how are you viewing it?
Yeah, very important question. I mean, the annexation is happening de facto on daily basis. I mean, Israel is confiscating land on daily basis, demolishing houses around Jerusalem on daily basis, building and expanding settlements on daily basis. So the de facto annexation is going on. For the time being, the de jure annexation was frozen, I don't think for long. And I think the idea, behind this, I mean, even call it the Abraham Accord, is disgusting. Because you are trying actually to package something that has, nothing to do with the Bible, to package it in a biblical language of Abraham and, the Abrahamic religions and Islam and Judaism are coming together, etc. I guess the idea behind it was, first of all, the timing of it has to do with the problems that Netanyahu and Trump were facing. So was to give them a boost. That is one. Secondly, it is right now we see a process of reorganizing the Middle East. You know, the empires and the US and others will always talk about the new Middle East. Mm-hmm. And I guess I see this as part of the new Middle East that they are trying to reorganize. But the third important point, I think, and this is where we need you, Hatem, mm-hmm. You know, for the last 20 years, we have been fighting Christian Zionism. Mm-hmm. Now, the Christian Zionists are actually creating Islamic Zionists using some religious figures in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region, you know, to say, you know, why bother? I mean, it's written in the Quran that, you know, this land belonged to the Jewish people, and so we have to have peace, etc. And it's interesting that actually some of the most Zionist Christian groups in the States in the last 2 years were visiting mainly Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, mm-hmm. and were actually welcomed by all of these sheikhs. And so you could see that connection being fought. For me, this is another imperial project, this time utilizing Islam as a tool for normalization.
Well, that's precisely one of the points that I wanted to raise later on, because we are experiencing not only in the Muslim world, but also here in the United States, the recruitment of Muslim figures. We have a program that's run by the Shalom Hartman Institute. It's called Muslim Leadership Initiative, that takes especially Muslim figures outside of the Arab Palestinian community in particular on these fully paid trips and a whole year engagement to see Israel through American Zionist Jewish eyes, and then begin to have a discourse to blame the Palestinian and you. So we're having this experience here in the United States, and we're also having the experience in the Muslim world, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. The process of normalization, it is to silence the Palestinians, one, but also to have the almost the blaming the victim for the fact that they are being victimized. So I think you're accurate to say that this is one of the new territories. Maybe there was something under the table being done before in terms of these coordination, but now it's out in the public and it's being recruited in various parts.
Right. And I think this is why we need to together to work on you know, dismantling this this narrative and exposing it to what it really is.
Let me maybe get into the question of the Kairos document, and to really highlight the particular parts of it, because it's the 13 different Palestinian churches and leadership that put out this document. And I think it's very important for us to build on the significance of it and to highlight what are the really key features of it that people need to be aware and how to mobilize it. I know the Presbyterians have written almost a study guide of how to take the Kairos document. And I think it's a very important piece to both study, and I'm speaking to my Muslim brothers and sisters who are listening, but also those outside of the Muslim community, that this is an important piece of contribution to the struggle for Palestine. So just give us almost a history of it, but also how to mobilize it in an effective way for us.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I mean, this document started really as a process like 2007, because at that time we felt, you know, there was no movement on the Palestinian question. We felt that we tried negotiation, it didn't work. We tried, you know, armed resistance, it didn't work. And we were really searching like for a third road, if you want, a third option. And we felt as Christians, we have to tell to say a word about it. especially that we felt at that time the world was slowly neglecting our story and our oppression. People were moving into other issues. And so a group of Christian leaders came together from different denominations. And this is the first time that we had people all the way, like from the Greek Orthodox to the Baptist, you know, with Lutheran, Anglicans, Roman Catholic, Greek Catholics, Armenian. I mean, everyone came together. And we wanted really to tell our story and to address it to our people, to the Christians in Palestine in the first place, but to the Christian of the world in a second. And the outcome was this document that we called Kairos, as I said, because we wanted to connect with the South African experience. And if you look at the document, it talks about faith, hope, and love. Faith really tries to deal with the issue how to understand the Bible from a Palestinian perspective. And here we were really trying to fight Christian Zionism and saying that you cannot really read the Bible through a Christian Zionist eye. This is not the Bible. It becomes something different. In terms of hope, we were struggling with the issue how to hope at times of despair. I mean, when everything, even right now, you feel everything is against you. You feel sometimes that, you are fighting an empire, you know? And so how can you have hope when you are fighting the empire and the empire have all the tools, you know, economic, political, ideological, etc. And there we developed really the idea, if I put it now in my words, hope is not what we see, but hope is what we do. So it was really a call for action. Hope is a call for action, not a call to wait, because as Palestinians often we were waiting, you know. I know a church member, he died some time ago. You know, every time two political leaders, say King Hussein and somebody else were meeting, he was always hoping that after the meeting, the Palestinian, oppression will be over. They will find a solution. And actually he died, he became maybe 80 years old while waiting. And we are saying waiting doesn't help. It's call to action. And the third was love. And love, we were struggling with the issue, how to love the enemy as a human and yet to resist the systemic oppression that he develops or she develops. And so that our struggle is not against individuals, but it's against systemic oppression. And I guess this is now the topic in the US. When I look at the African-American, and what's happening in the street, it's really about systemic oppression. This is our problem. Our problem is not with this individual white person or that white person. It's with the system. It's a systematic oppression. So that's what really we're focusing on. I have to say that this document was important, first of all, to mobilize our own people. Because sometimes if you live in Palestine, sometimes it's easy to lose hope or heart. And so mobilizing our people was our first aim. But secondly, mobilizing the Christian community worldwide. And I have to say within the last 11 years, there are today Kairos groups in almost 30 countries. And just recently, we actually launched, as Global Kairos, we launched the Cry for Hope, which I think is really another important feature there. And it's the subtitle is A Call for Decisive Action. And this is really what we are aiming at. Because, too many words were said about the Palestinian issue. We had negotiations unendlessly, but without action. And what we really need is a decisive action.
So, as you mentioned, faith, hope, and love. Maybe for our audience, if you have your wish, what type of projects you would recommend for people to engage? Projects that you're engaged in, and you mentioned the project in Gaza is very important. Project at the university, al-Kalima. Mention some of those projects and programs. Maybe also Palestine as well as outside of Palestine. I know some of our audience are engaged in all types of social justice movements, some churches, some Muslim organizations, student organizations. What are those programs that people can actually latch on and begin to do some work?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, maybe let me start first. What can people like in the US maybe do? And I think awareness is important, because there are different, awareness is an ongoing thing. And I think working on the narrative awareness is important because all the time, Christian Zionists, the Israel lobby, the religious right or the political right, they are trying to take us to a terrain that is really totally, it's a tactic just to avoid the real questions. Mm-hmm. So you don't talk anymore about what's happening in Palestine, the real issues, the real suffering, the annexation, the colonization, etc. But you start talking about replacement theology or about, the violence of the Palestinian. And you start talking about, the persecuted Christians or whatever. And we need to keep making people aware on the real issue. Mm. So that is important. And this is why I think I'm personally, so involved in writing because I feel awareness is important. But also social media, etc. So I think that's important. Secondly, I really hope that many churches and groups can come together, maybe to read the book, to study it, but also to connect to Palestine. What you are doing today is an excellent example. Is using Zoom to invite people from Palestine. To connect. That's very, very important. We need more like what you are doing, Hatem. Great work. So that is one piece. But what action can we take in the US? And there are lots of actions that can be done in the States, from from using boycott to supporting students in Palestine, to creating bridges between the US and Palestine, exchange programs. This is really very, very important. For us, I guess, as a University of Arts and Culture, we want to utilize the medium of art. Mm-hmm. Not only to tell our story, but also to spread, because not everyone is interested in a political lecture. Mm-hmm. And often when we do political lectures, from my experience in the States, you get the 60 people, and 40 of them they know everything. They are there, to support you, and 10 people are there by accident. They don't know how they ended up there. Mm. And 10 people are there maybe to make some problems. Mm-hmm. But what we are trying to do now, we have, for example, because our students are producing films, to use film festivals. Mm-hmm. San Francisco Film Festival, for example, screen some of our films. One of our students got the 3rd award at Cannes Film Festival. It was the first time that a Palestinian student, gets something at Cannes. And so, we offer as a university for groups and churches many films that our students have produced, and they talk about life in Palestine. The hopes and the fears, both of them are articulated in this. And many of the films, got excellent awards, international awards as well. So that is one. Or right now we have in the States 3 art exhibition touring. Photography exhibition, but also art exhibition. Again, a different way of telling our story and connecting with the cultural community, because this art community is important in changing perception. Many things that change throughout the year in the US, they change through the art community. Actually, it's the art community who create often social change, and so this is what we want to utilize. We had festivals in the States that we were doing, bringing students, etc. But also now, since online education is progressing, we would like to see more specialized professors in the arts, say in the States, give courses online to our students in Palestine. Developing partnership between universities here and our university. But also special attention we would like to give to Gaza, because the situation there is unbearable. But you have there, so many young people who are so gifted. They are just waiting for somebody really to develop that skills so that they can tell their story. So these are just, some ideas.
Yeah. I'm completely with you on the importance of art, culture, and cultural production, and maybe building on Edward Said's work on Orientalism, his work in relations to latent Orientalism, which are really the area of culture, production, the art, cinema, the movies that actually creates the stereotypical images that then inform policy. Exactly. So as we begin to think of the different ways, both of narrating Palestine through the arts, through the music, through the culture, increasingly we're actually having to narrate Palestine through food. One area that these days we're confronting in the United States is the stealing and transformation of Palestinian food. Now, I have a vested interest, so every time they say Israeli kunafa, as a Nablsi, that's just like I go into a crisis. But you have the
falafel. That's your territory.
So it's my territory. So it's not only in terms of art, but food, dress, right, and modes of really transforming Palestine by colonizing every symbolic representation of it.
Exactly, and this is really, part of settler colonialism, because settler colonialism, they don't want to replace you physically only, but they want to replace you in every aspect of your life. So occupy your food, your culinary, etc. That's really. And so, we have published several also culinary art books as university. We did one, and just recently now a new book is coming out with several personalities from Palestine called Craving Palestine.
Yeah. So whenever you have a tasting, just invite me, so just to be able to look at it.
But not for Kinafa, because
I'll have to invite you. I'll have to invite you for that. Really, maybe we could ask a couple of questions, or maybe one question about the PDS movement and how the PDS movement actually can be integrated or is integrated into the work that you do, especially as we're seeing some success in different places, whether it's in Ireland, Italy, even success on the college campuses in the United States, and boycott, divestment, and sanctions, especially in the cultural academic boycott, which has been a very critical piece of the discussion.
Right. Yeah, I mean, regarding the cultural boycott, this is something that we signed on from day one, and for us that is very important. But as Kairos Palestine, actually, we were really attacked mainly because Kairos Palestine mentions PDS, because we are saying it's under love, actually, it comes under love. Because if we want to find alternatives to armed resistance, I mean, what tools do you have? If you exclude PDS, you are left with not really much. And so Kairos document actually mentioned that, and this is why Kairos document was attacked so much, by Zionist groups and so on. Another it's linked to that. Why is culture important? Because it has to do with your own identity. And developing a dynamic identity is really important. And for me, this is our biggest fight, is how to not only to preserve our identity, because preserving is the wrong thing, but how to keep developing it so that it's not crushed, because at the end of the day, occupation wants to crush your identity. And so how can we resist that? And for me, arts and culture are the tools to do exactly that.
And maybe for some of our audience that are listening, if you have an academic program, if you happen to be in charge of a department or teaching in one place or the other, these are the areas where you could actually proactively. So there is the BDS of speaking about why we need to boycott, divest, and sanction, but also to create links with the Palestinians, to send your students to study in Palestine, to visit, to engage, as a way of also bringing the culture, the society, the narrative of Palestinians into direct engagement.
And Hatem, for those who are interested in these kinds of activities, they can contact our support organization, Bright Stars of Bethlehem,
yes,
that really helps facilitate these kinds of exchanges and visits, etc. So it's Bright Stars of Bethlehem. If they look it up, brightstarsbethlehem.org is the website.
Yeah, for those in the Bay Area, we have a chapter in here that usually does a lot of activities, and they actually have a Christmas gatherings for people to buy products from Palestine as gifts. So I'll make sure that we will provide that contact information for people to actually link up with the work. We have a number of questions in the Q&A. So can you access the Q&A if you're going to take a look? There's a cluster of questions about relationship and solidarity in comparisons to the struggle with the Black Lives Matters or the minorities in the United States. How do you navigate that, or what would be your perspective on it?
Sorry, I missed that. I was reading the questions. So can you repeat the question?
There's a few questions on that cluster of really looking at the struggle in the United States and how the struggle in the United States relative to what we see in terms of violence that's directed at the Black community, and what can we navigate the solidarity between Palestinians and the Black community. And I know there is a discussion taking place almost in the next hour, specifically dealing with Palestinian Black solidarity.
Yeah. Actually, this solidarity for me is very important, and we need to, invest more and more in this, because if you look at it, the story is so similar. It starts actually with demonizing both Palestinians and Black people through the Bible, through misusing the Bible as children of Ham.
So the theological location of racism.
Exactly. So it starts there, and both of us are there in the same chapter. So it starts there, and then you feel how colonialism was really the trigger that took everything we had and tried to enslave us. For the African American community, I think their situation is even, I mean, their oppression is much longer than ours. Unfortunately, we always talk about the Holocaust, but we never talk about the plight of the African American. We don't talk about the plight of the Native American, because that is, I mean, the world didn't really do anything to compensate for what they have been going through. But also, if you look at how the neighborhoods of the African American were conceived, and how they were put in those places that were not the prime land, but really the places with less resources. You can see the assembly between what's happening in the West Bank today, you know, and the Trump plan actually, and what's happening to the African American community.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because today is the anniversary of the March on Washington by MLK.
Right.
But MLK in his later years, especially 67 and 68, in his speech, The Three Evils of Society, Militarism, Materialism, and Racism, he spoke of the condition of the Black person in relation to the internal colonial. So he actually looked at the conditions of the Black community from the lens of experiencing internal colonization. And in here, the similarity in terms of looking at how the structure within inner city communities really follows the same type of topography of settler colonialism and colonialism in general.
Exactly. And I think, you know, settler colonialism is really another important factor that brings us together, because when you talk about secular colonialism, there are two other important features of settler colonialism. It's not only taking the land, replacing the people, etc., but one which is really important is demonizing the indigenous. So the indigenous, or the Blacks in this case, are the violent, are the terrorists. But the state terrorism, nobody talks about it. So you demonize them, and through that, you get the right to oppress them more. And the other important aspect of settler colonialism is a policing state, because to keep that oppression, the settler colonial, they have to develop a policing state. And this is unfortunately what you see happening in Israel. And unfortunately now many police stations in the US were asking Israeli police officers to come and teach them. And so I think this is part, that's part of the other connection that is happening there.
Yeah, we have the ADL and the AJC and some of the major Zionist organizations promote the training program for local police to go to train on violence and how to counter violence in Israel. So it becomes the go-to place, not only in terms of police, but also the whole notion of the war on terrorism, that Israel becomes the go-to experts on that field.
Right. And, if you think of George Floyd and one day later, Halak in Jerusalem, very similar story that is happening on daily basis, where the life of the individual Palestinian or African-American is almost worthless. If one Israeli is killed, that will be in the news everywhere. But now you need maybe 20 Palestinians to be killed to get notice of it. So that is part of that ideology.
I would like to thank Ruth Nilsson. She put us the link for brightstarsofbethlehem.org, so it's available in the Q&A, so make sure to access it. Gregory asked the question, could we hear more about Islamic Zionism in light of the Israeli-UAE agreement? So if you want to expand on the emergence and the development and really what take place. Increasingly, we're going to see some tours that are coming to use the visitation to Al-Aqsa Mosque as a form of normalization.
Exactly. Yeah. Actually, I wrote about Islamic Zionism, I started talking about it 2 or 3 years ago. and people were attacking me. They thought this is just not the time to talk about it. It's not important, etc. I remember last year I was in Brazil, and I met with the ambassadors of the Gulf region and Saudi Arabia and so on. And they asked me to speak, and they wanted me to speak about Christian Zionism, which I did. But then towards the end, I mentioned Islamic Zionism and normalization, and then they were like, speechless. But the thing is, religion, if you look at religion in the Middle East right now, religion is used in two ways. I mean, religion is used in the US. Yes. I will not talk about that because you live it day in and day out. And but if you look at the Middle East, religion is used in two ways. One, by those in power to give them legitimacy. So you have to be related to the Prophet to give you legitimacy to rule. You have to be the defender of Islam to give you legitimately to rule. So that's one way. The other way is that the opposition utilizes religion to come to power. And so that is the dilemma we feel in. And so if we look at the Gulf region right now, etc., whenever the Gulf leaders want to move towards normalization, they need religious legitimacy to do that. So what they do is, they create these sheikhs that suddenly come up with a Quranic verse and try to build around it, the legitimacy, why to normalize relations with Israel, as if this were a religious problem, which is not a religious problem. I mean, our problem is not a religious problem. Our problem actually is a problem of colonialism, systemic racism, oppression. That's our problem. Now, so they all of these sheikhs, they and you can see them on social media, they start developing these Quranic teachings.
If they lean toward peace, right, you lean toward peace, but they don't tell you they're leaning toward taking a piece of your land, but that's a separate issue.
Right, exactly. So that's what we are talking about, and I guess this will accelerate in the next months and years, and so we have to be really aware of it. And there, Hatem, we need you, because I cannot do that fight. I fight Christian Zionism. You have to deal with.
I'll promise you that I will be giving you a piece soon on that subject, because it's something that we've been following. We've been following and doing the work on the MLI in the United States, and their work in there, challenging also some of these new modes of cooperation under the rubric that they're fighting Islamophobia. For example, a relationship that's been struck by AJC, the American Jewish Committee, that also travels to the Gulf to advise them on all types of issues, but they've been one of the primary organization that mainstreamed anti-Muslim discourse. So on the one hand, they slap you. On the other hand, they actually are offering themselves as the go-to and inviting a number of Muslim personalities into that space. So there is a systematic work that's being done to actually put an Islamic umbrella over settler colonialism with Israel for a whole notion of modernity, development, business deals, which creates, the Arab world becoming the conduit for it, and then despotic ruling or despotic governments that becomes for it the way to have access to the United States. The road to Washington, D.C. passes through Tel Aviv. So before you come to the United States, you basically develop those relations, and it's good to have a religious figure that basically give you a Quranic statement or a hadith, and lo and behold, you embrace settler colonialism. So I think you're accurate that we need some heavy work on this in the days and months ahead.
Right, and I think it's very important to work together and to involve even Jewish groups like Jewish Voices for Peace and others who are fighting their own fight also with that. So yeah, that's important.
Maybe the last question, another question says from Herb, he said, have you experienced yourself Islamic Zionism in Palestine?
No, in Palestine, actually, I didn't experience that. It's very difficult, I think, to be Palestinian Muslim and to be Zionist. Although I wouldn't be totally surprised if a few people like that will emerge. Because I know within the Christian Palestinian community, we have some of those people that emerged in the last few years, especially in Galilee and others, because again, you know, you have churches from Texas, for example, investing heavily in Nazareth, you know, creating their seminary to train people with this kind of Christian Zionism. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that developing sometimes in Palestine, because again, there is this huge imperial machinery that wants to produce these kinds of people.
One of the last questions is actually touches on your speaking about the cultural production and Palestinian says there is not enough cultural reporting in the region at the moment. As a graduate student journalist, an aspiring foreign correspondent, what are some sources I can use to begin bringing more attention to cultural, music, artistic, and religious movement like Kairos in Palestine? How can I combat the systematic colonization that allows for the Western religious system that are accelerating this process? So maybe some guidance.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you know, for example, our friend, he can maybe start with one of the books that we published. My colleague at the university, Hatem Mitwasi, published a book about Palestinian art that gives like an overview of the development of Palestinian art in the last 50 years. But another thing is, I mean, today, I mean, if we look at the film, I mean, Palestinian films are making it all the way to, you know, the most prestigious, you know, awards. In fact, right now, one of the Palestinian films is running for such an award. And so, I mean, there is, I mean, today it's not like 10 years or 20 years ago. The Palestinian art is becoming really more and more visible. If, I mean, just contact us and I can put you in contact with people who can really help you there a bit more with very concrete ideas. But Palestine is I mean, culture is so lively, is developing in a way that I see this very important transformation happening right now in music, in film, in visual art, but also in other fields.
Yeah. I know locally here in the Bay Area we have Aswat, which is actually having an online Palestinian concert, and I will share that as well. That they try as much as possible to bring the culture and music and so on into the spaces that otherwise would not have that representation. So I think that's very important.
There are maybe two other, just quickly. Yes. You know, or three. We, as university, we launched a competition in painting. We call it Ismail Shammout Award. Ismail Shammout was one of the most famous, maybe, Palestinian artists. And so if people look that on Facebook, they will see actually right now, the next competition is taking place and we will announce it in a month's time. We created an award in photography under the name of Kareem Abboud. Kareem Abboud was the first female photographer in the whole Arab world. She was born in Bethlehem. She started her career already in 1920. I don't think at that time there were even female photographer in the US. So if you look up Kareem Abboud, you will find this competition. And we started also a Bethlehem Student Film Festival, asking students throughout the world to send, their films to Palestine. This year, we got over 3,300 films from over 70 countries. So the student festival is becoming important. And for us, it's important to reach students while they are studying so that they can connect with Palestine. And so if we have students in film, please look up this festival and send for the next year, next April, your films.
Yeah. One area that, again, if the individuals who asked the question, for me, I had a student that did their honor thesis on reading the walls, especially the art that's on the wall and the cartoons, the writing is also documenting the various periods. For example, as the George Floyd's murder took place, you had a mural that came out on the wall when the Pope visited Bethlehem in Palestine. You also had a whole art that is there. So this is a way for actually reading Palestinian, narrating Palestinian history through both challenging the wall, but also transforming how we see the wall without actually looking at also Bansky's work that is so critical.
Hatem, one important thing actually, we are proud that as university, we were the first group to paint on the wall, 2003. And what we did, we invited 3 of the top Mexican muralists who were painting on the wall in Mexico. That was still very small, etc. We invited them to Palestine. They spent 2 weeks with us, 2003. And they did like over 10 huge murals. And this is how the whole process actually started. So we were there at the beginning and we wrote about it. We wrote, the whole story is documented with those pictures.
Yeah, maybe at one point I'll design a course reading the wall, narrating Palestine, and really going through that. So maybe we could work on this on the future as well.
With pleasure, with pleasure.
So maybe just a last question. What gives you hope and what's next in your work?
Yeah, what gives me hope is looking at our students and seeing the transformation that is happening there. Often they come thinking it's over, we cannot do much, and suddenly through the 4 years, I see how they find hope, they find a language, they find a way to tell their story, and the resilience of our people is really what gives me hope. And this is why, I say, this whole settler colonialism, they were thinking they can replace us easily. Today, there are 6.5 million Palestinians in historic Palestine that are resilient, and they learned the lesson from the Nakba. They are not going to go away. And the other thing is we have 6.5 million Palestinians in the diaspora. And Hatem, you are the best example for that. I mean, whenever I meet, these Palestinians in the diaspora today, they are much different than 30 years ago. 30 years ago, they were very, very cautious. They didn't want to engage in politics. Today, if I look at, and I said that just in my lecture at Chautauqua 3 days ago, if I see, for example, all the groups for Palestinians, for students for justice in Palestine at the universities in the US. I mean, I'm so proud because this is often the second, third, fourth generation of students, who are just not giving up. They are very well educated. They are articulate. You know, my daughter happened to chair one of those groups in St. Olaf a few years ago. So, you know, I feel proud, and this gives me hope that, you know, okay, our struggle is long because we are fighting an empire, but at the end of the day, you know, and this is the lesson I learned being a theologian. You know, if you look at our history in Palestine, we have all of these empires. They came, none of them was able to stay forever. Sometimes it took up to 400 years, the longest. But at the end of the day, you know, the local people were able to stay. And this is why in one of my books, I talk about the saying of Jesus, blessed are the meek, they will inhabit the land. Because often we think this is nonsense because it's the empire, it's the settlers who inherit the land. But Jesus looked at history longue durée, and he saw all the empires, they come, they cannot stay. But it's the meek, it's those people who are really not the empire, who are the weak. But they because of their resilience, they stay. So what is next? As I said, this my next book, The Politics of Persecution, Middle Eastern Christianity in the Age of Empire, is hopefully will come out in 9 months. I'm working on now a few other new book about Kareem Abboud. We wrote that in Arabic, but now we are writing a book in English because we want to celebrate, you know, these Palestinian icons that nobody maybe knew about them. But because this gives us hope, you know. It gives us also an insight into Palestine before the Nakba. Sure. You know, where we are as people and so on. So this is in terms of writing. In terms of right now we are working to transform the college to become a full-fledged university on arts and culture. So we are working heavily. Today, actually, we had a strategic plan with all of our staff on that. So this will keep us busy for the next 2 years.
And by all means, you have us as a community of support. Anything that you would like for us to contribute in any way, time, effort, and so on to your effort, call on us, we're there. And also you have an extended invitation. As soon as the book comes out, you have to come to Berkeley for a lecture, or we'll organize it jointly with the Graduate Theological Unions. As you know, you're a frequent guest, so the invitation is there, and look forward to really picking your book and promote it as well. It's a very, very critical piece for me, the voice of Palestinian Christians to come out, but also Palestinians in general. That's part of the constructing the mosaic narrative that continues to be absent. Exactly. Really, thank you, Mitri, for this enriching conversation. This opened new vistas for us to engage. I think the conversation about Christian Zionism, conversations about Kairos, Palestine, but more critically, the push toward writing about Islamic Zionism. I know that I have an assignment now, so thank you very much for that. And wish you and your family and everyone in Palestine the best. Take care of yourself, take care of the community that you minister to during the COVID-19. All of you are in our prayers and thoughts at this point, as the challenges are multiple, but I trust that we will persevere. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hatem. We are so proud of what you are doing. Keep the good work that you are doing. And I know we have so many projects to work on together in the future. I look forward to that. It's always really exciting and enriching to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, wish you all the best.
Salamat. Thank you. Thanks.